silence was automatic. Hello all, and welcome to the event. Very glad to see that you're joining us tonight. My name is Kirsten Shaddick, and along with Flavius Sansa and Jerry, just coming upstairs, I run the Youth Union. So I just want to say a few words about society before we began. The York Union is a public speaking and debate platform for the university. We try to bring speakers in from across the country to hold engaging talks and debates on campus. We traditionally host political engagements, but we're trying to broaden our kind of horizon to art and culture and so forth. So other talks will be hosted throughout the term coming up, so you've got a lot more to look forward to. So yeah, we do rely on the generosity of public donation in order for our society to bring speakers. So if you don't or haven't already seen the collection bucket, it'd be great if you could do some contributing because we really do rely on public funds. So yeah, without any further delay, I'll hand you over to Jerry. So enjoy the time.
Second yourselves be presented the argument here as the work of Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens is available on Sunday College, author and University of York. With circulation of well over 1 million copies each Sunday, Hitchens holds some of the most widespread in the United Kingdom. He is an 8 times published author, with books including Knowledge of Britain, The Rage Against the Law, The Law Without Law, and most recently, this evening, Peter will be presenting his argument, the case against marijuana legalization. Therefore, without further ado, let's welcome Peter Hitchens.
You just also have a round of applause for my opponent. So I was to be here, didn't turn up, so many of them don't, can't imagine why. Anyway, before we begin, a couple of questions for you all. First of all, how many people here think that marijuana should be legalized? Can you please raise your hands? Only one, including mine. And how many think it shouldn't be? Please raise yours. Oh, at least there's some people. The second question is, I know I've always been told that vicious, brutal, and savage police and court prohibition is levied against the use of marijuana in this country. Could any of you who have actually used an illegal drug at any point in your lives, please raise your hands? So much prohibition. We come to that in a little while. After all, if it really were, first of all, you would have died, and second, you would put your hand up, wouldn't you? So, very, very simply, let me begin with a small parable, which may appear to have nothing to do with the subject, but which does. Take yourselves back, if you would, to the deep, frozen era of the Soviet Union, when the KGB secret police still operated. Think yourself back to a winter's evening in Moscow, where the KGB training school's annual course for new agents is just coming to an end. This sort of thing is now like course at the university, but in those days it was done in Moscow. The students have been given a final mission, and upon this mission depends whether or not they're going to become agents of the Committee of State Security. And the final mission is this, and if you've been in Moscow, you know how difficult it is, especially if you've been in Moscow in the winter. They've been told, go out in the streets of Moscow in late December and find a rabbit and bring it back. So, they've gone out in pairs to do this, and pair by pair they return as the evening draws on, empty-handed to the KGB headquarters just behind Hitchens Square. Only 2 have yet to return as the clock ticks towards the final deadline at 7 p.m. Those used to it all, Volodya and Kostya. And finally, they do appear with seconds to spare, and they have in their hands a bag, and it's wriggling. And the instructor says to the comrades, do you have a rabbit? And they say, yes, comrade instructor, we do indeed have a rabbit. So you've got to show it to us then. So they empty the bag off the table, and out drops a very, very disgusted looking pussycat. And the instructor says, comrades, that is not a rabbit, it is a pussycat. They say, no, comrade, you've been taking it back out this propaganda. That's what it said. But after we interrogated it for a couple of hours, it admitted it was a rabbit. I mean, what this illustrates is that people are willing to believe absolutely anything that suits them. And that completely characterises the debate about drugs in this country, where it's always impossible to find, for instance, in that chamber of intellectual triumph, the House of Parliament, almost impossible to find anybody who knows or understands anything about the subject at all, and where the current fashionable belief that the best thing to do about drugs, especially marijuana, is just to let rid and legalise it, is almost universal. I once gave evidence to the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee on the subject. It was like an out-of-body experience. I was there. I was explaining to them the facts which I had researched over many years, and they were sitting there appearing to listen. But in fact, they weren't there. They already made their minds up, and I find this is a very common position I use. So I beg you, before you cling to whatever it is that you believe about, that you actually listen to some of the things I'm about to tell you. The first thing is, what would be the use of legalizing marijuana? What do its advocates actually say that it will achieve? What they have claimed for many years is that by legalizing it, they would enable it to be licensed and sold legally, and they would therefore separate it from its criminal associations. They would remove the influence of criminal gangs from the sale of marijuana, and as a result, it could be sold in safer forms, such as they allege exist. Now, they've been saying this, I think, for about 20 years. Unfortunately for them, during the past few years, there have been a number of places which have actually legalized marijuana. The state of Colorado, the United States, the state of California, the United States, the country of Uruguay in South America, and most recently, the entire country of Canada. And what has happened in all of these countries? What has happened in all of these countries is that this argument has been totally and utterly disproved. In all of them, the number of outlets selling legal cannabis is hugely outnumbered by the continuing existence of illegal outlets still controlled by criminal gangs. Underselling, because when you legalize the drug in a country, in any advanced country, what immediately happens is that it's subject to taxation. And it's very, very easy to see that despite the fact that the drug is legal, it's still very tempting for criminal gangs to do as they do and to continue to sell it illegally without taxation. And of course, it's extremely convenient for buyers who don't want to pay the tax to do so. So there has been a total failure in all the jurisdictions where legalization has actually taken place for the main benefit claimed for the legalization of marijuana to take place. It simply has not happened. Nor is there any sign that it's likely to happen. The legalization in Colorado has been going on for some years now, and the illegal market continues. Very high strengths of marijuana continues to be sold illegally in large amounts, and nothing is done about it because in the period before legalization something else happened which I'm going to come to. That is that, and this often happens in the periods before major changes. The police and the courts have largely given up prosecution. Therefore, although the substance is technically illegal, it actually isn't. Now, that is the state that we're in this country. It's a state we've been in for a very, very long time. And the next time anybody tells you there is severe prohibition of marijuana in this country, urge them at least to obtain from the library if they can't be to buy this excellent book, which we all can afford. As the publishing trades the book, they never bought, because somehow or other, obviously nobody in the publishing trade or the reviewing trade smokes marijuana, but for some reason or other, when I published the book, although it's crammed with entirely correct research, which demonstrates the legalization, it was almost entirely unreviewed and unnoticed, and as a result, I've had to flog it and persuade people to read it with occasions like this to get the message out. But nothing in it has ever been challenged back. It's all true. What it established was beginning right back in the late 1960s, a very, very well-financed and sophisticated campaign, originally called the Soma campaign, which any of you who've read all the Huxley's Brave New World will understand the significance of. The Soma campaign had a full-page advertisement taken out of the Times newspaper and paid for by the Four Beatles, which was a major issue at the time. The Wooden Report, which argued without making any effort whatsoever to bring disadvantages in cannabis legalization for a de facto decriminalization of it. A conservative Lord Chancellor, the Minister of Justice, would now be Lord Aylsham, in 1973 pretty much ordered magistrates in this country to cease assembly of the prisons of marijuana. Magistrates who obeyed, so that by 1979, I think you can find in the prisons of this country one person who had been sent there for the offence of possessing the simple possession of marijuana. One person. And that was as a result of Syria conducted by the New Zealand Misuse Drug. Yet all this time, we're told by the legalizers that this terrible, brutal, unkind regime is ruining people's lives by going around arresting people for being in possession of marijuana, throwing them to prison, and destroying their careers. It simply is not true. After the Russian report in 1997, this was 2001, this was codified. Not by Parliament, which hasn't touched the issue in 1971, but codified by what was then the Association of Chief Police Officers, now the National Police Chiefs Council. And what they said, ignoring Parliament, was that anybody who was caught in possession of marijuana would be given something called cannabis warning, which is nothing. It's not recorded centrally, it has no effect on you at all. It doesn't matter anything about examining a conviction or arrest. You wouldn't even need to declare it to the US Embassy if you were applying for an arrest to go there. It's completely and utterly backward. To begin with, these warnings were actually given, but after quite a short time, the statistics showed that the police stopped even bothering to do that. And a couple of years ago, so you may remember a demonstration on the 20th of April, 420 Day, by supporters of marijuana legalization in Hyde Park, where the police stood around and watched people smoking there. 2 people were in fact arrested that day out of the hundreds of available. I think probably because of the very, very large quantities of marijuana they possessed. I pursued it to the magistrate's court. One of them was fined, I think, £30 plus a £50 victim surcharge, and the other didn't bother to turn up. So you can see this terror of law and justice that is supposed to be visited in marijuana is false. By the way, if anybody would like me to throw some cough sweets at them, then they can carry on coughing. But otherwise, will you please try and get a grip on it, because it's very irritating for everybody else. And what's more, it's horrible on the recording if anybody has to listen to it. I promise you don't have to do it. And also, I do get so cross I become quite accurate. Personally, I believe the death penalty for it. I know it's not being imposed in difficult times, but please just get it under control. So you just see how deterrence works in law. It's one of the things I want to demonstrate. So now we move on to the question of whether the smoking marijuana is a victimless crime, which is one of the things that was claimed by the legalizers back in 1957. Well, actually, it does have many victims. And I've explained to you in dismal detail how this works, referring to a case known directly to me. It involves, if any of you are readers of the Independent newspaper, which you ought to be, and if any of you read the work of Patrick Coburn, who is probably the greatest foreign correspondent writing in the English language of our time, then you will have heard of Patrick, my friend. What you may not have heard of, but you should have done, is the book which he wrote, called Henry's Demons, which concerned what happened to his son Henry, also known as me for many years. Henry was a child full of promise. Who would, like his brother, have ended up a highly qualified person studying at university and going on to a full life. But alas for Henry, at his Canterbury Grammar School at the age of around 12, he came into contact with people who thought that marijuana was a harmless soft drug. What happened to Henry was that he went, as Patrick puts it very bluntly, he went mad. He was found swimming naked in flooded rivers in winter. He was found wandering in places where he didn't know where he was and became incoherent. Now, thanks to very powerful doses of antipsychotic drugs, which are not pleasant to take, which are horrible effects on the body and mind, can live something roughly approximating to a normal life, but the life that he would have had is gone. And this is not by any means uncommon. And Patrick very courageously wrote about this, because he decided that something really terrible had happened. He was approached over and over and over again by friends, colleagues, who had never spoken to birth certificate, exactly the same thing happened to a child of mine. Over and over, people wrote to him. is extraordinarily common, but it features in no statistic, no reality. The association between marijuana and mental illness is in fact very strong. Nobody has proved the causal that the Swedish Army survey of, I think, 1987, which initially established it, was not even intended to find it, but it was absolutely devastating the way in which it showed the feeling between use of this drug and mental illness. The Dunedin study was absolutely showed feeling as well, also between the use of marijuana in school years and terrible declines in school performance and intelligence. It is an extremely dangerous drug, and one of the things that I object to most of all is that it is referred to by people as a soft drug, in contrast to the supposedly hard drugs, heroin and cocaine, perhaps actually. This is a grievous public relations trick, and it's one comparable to one work by Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, who invented public relations and improved his skill in the 1920s, when he got a group of women on a 4th of July demonstration in New York City to parade down the streets, proclaiming that cigarettes were tortures of freedom. There are still women in the world who are dying, thanks to that. The idea that smoking was some kind of proclamation of feminism and freedom, which took root and actually was taken up by the tobacco companies and decisions, so marketing it especially to women for that purpose. It's as evil and wicked and wrong as that. I would ask all of you in this session to think seriously about whether you believe that lifelong, irreversible mental illness, which can put you in the lockdoor, or can put you in the door begging for money, or whatever it may put you up to, is conceivably be described as a soft outcome for taking any drug. For it is not. And the use of this phrase, soft drug, is a dangerous public relations trick which you should be very wary of spreading, because it does enormous damage. It attempts to cause seduction and women. It's hard for you to imagine, because few of you here are parents, it's hard for you to imagine what it would be like to be faced with the care for the rest of your life of somebody who has become permanently mentally ill as a result of voluntary drug taking. But I promise you that the blow is extremely grievous, and those who have suffered it, known to me, would tell you if they were here that it was very grievous. It is not a victimless crime. Even if you forget about the parents and brothers and sisters whose lives are devastated by this, don't forget also that these people are not going to be able to support themselves. They're going to become also for the rest of their lives charges on all of us. Who will pay for their stays in the mental hospital? Who will pay for them to be fed and clothed and housed? Who will look after them after their parents are gone and they're left with nobody who particularly cares about them, and yet they still have irreversible consequences of their fault? And then tell me this is business. It simply is not true. So here you have it. Pretty very personal. An irresponsible campaign, driven not wholly, but largely by people who see very large opportunities to make huge amounts of money out of human misery. People who are comparable in always, people who I think everybody in this room despises. Anybody in this room who defend big tobacco, which for years and years and years insisted that the product was not dangerous. And it continued to sell and market through resisted controls on the advertising because they just wanted to make money out of it. They demonstrated, it seems to me, to the satisfaction of anybody, the big business is perfectly prepared to allow its clients using its products according to manufacturers' instructions, but to die and become broke for the sake of their profits. And there's another element in this which is extremely worrying, because you find among politicians a very, very strong desire to promote, a very, very strong desire to promote the legalization of marijuana for another equally simple reason, and that is that they hope to raise large amounts of tax for it, because the very sensible decision of people, once they understood the truth, to stop smoking cigarettes has deprived governments all across the Western world of huge amounts of revenue which they've come to expect. They now see a chance to get it back. So again, two groups of people who fundamentally cynical reasons, people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing, two groups of people are doing something which you despise. They're comparable to the fast food chains, they're comparable to the sugary drink, change their comfort, all the people do all the things that everybody dislikes. And yet for some strange, absolutely impenetrable reason, impenetrable to me anyway, for some reason, the campaign for the legalization of marijuana, far from being treated as a pariah of wickedness, which it ought to be, is fashionable, both among the young and among the middle aged. This is a very old problem. When I was at this university almost half a century ago, marijuana was already quite it was so many times and had a common with people who weren't smoking. And it may well be true, but this is a very old problem. It's been going on for a very long time. It's been accelerating. It's now rapidly reaching the point where those who are spending, if you look at the campaign for Proposition 64 in California, the billionaires who spend huge amounts of money for legalization, that those who are spending think they are on the absolute edge of success. And yet, if they are successful, within very, very few years, there will be evidence of everybody that we have made a grievous mistake, but it will be irreversible, because we've shown with alcohol to try and criminalize once again anything which is illegal is almost certainly an impossible task. We have one chance. We have the evil green lobby, big government, pushing for this legalization, and we have you, who will have something in the world which they want to create, which will be full of people suffering for their profits, alongside you and absolutely. There are other elements of this which I'll discuss later when we come to the questions about the increasing correlation between cannabis and violent crime as well. But it will not be a pleasant society in which you will live if you let this happen. So I just came here to say, if you please, do not let it happen. You won't have another chance. You will be very, very full of work and regret if you do that. For that reason, and really for that reason alone, did I come here to make this speech. I do hope that some of you at least will be forced to think again by what I've said. I'm going to take as many questions and challenges as anybody cares to throw. Again, please not off.
Just have mics to you so you can be heard more easily. Yeah, so first question.
Hi, you linked between the mental health problems that are caused by marijuana and marijuana itself. How is this different between the mental health problems caused by other legal drugs such as alcohol and alcohol itself?
Well, the difference is very simple. Alcohol is legal. I think if any of us were able to put it like this, if alcohol were now at the levels of use with marijuana, and if there were a campaign to make it legal and it was illegal, knowing what we know about alcohol, none of us would be stupid enough to legalize it. But that's happened. I can't for the life of me see how the disastrous legalization of one dangerous poison could conceivably be advanced by anybody with any sort of grasp of it as a case for legalizing another disastrous poison. No, right, well, that's that one. The entire page, the entire article, quite long, but very wizardly written on the Peter Hitches blog entitled Stupid Arguments for Legalization Drug. And that is the top of the list. And you can read it, I beg you to do so, because it is an unbelievably stupid argument. And yet, as far as I know, it's taught in school. Either that or it's in Christmas crackers, because I am Catholic so often. How can people not see that it is so different? And next, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. It was a lot informative. So my question is, you were talking about Henry, how he got mental health disorder after using this drug. Now there are a lot of other well-known people who have achieved quite a lot in their life, who have spoken openly about using drugs and these sorts of illegal substances. So my question to you is basically, I'm sure a lot of students will still keep smoking marijuana, and most of the times nothing's going to happen. don't you think telling them that about these mental health issues and then them smoking and seeing that nothing actually happens most of the times is actually kind of losing their trust rather than gaining it?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't have any statistics because all the money is on the other side. Nobody's done much in the way of work on the correlation between marijuana and mental illness. And the other point about mental illness in modern society is that in this country, largely thanks to power, the mental hospitals were largely dismantled and destroyed. The National Health Service is as uninterested as it can possibly be in recording mental illness and in treating it. It's very expensive and difficult, and they don't like doing it. So there's no incentive. Also, the privacy issues. Alex Berenson used to put telling children, which is the American version, points this out too. Privacy issues make it very difficult to gather or obtain any statistics on the level of mental illness. So I would very strongly advise anyone about being complacent about this. The fact that you yourself have personally encountered anybody who has become mentally ill as a result of smoking cannabis doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen. I have not for some years been at all, in fact, encountered anybody who'd become seriously ill from smoking cigarettes. But what I did, not all that long ago, I promise you that I was not, as I put it, I wish that the person involved had taken more notice of what had been said. The problem with these things is until they hit you, you don't really understand how bullying they are. And also by the time they hit you, they're too late. But here's the point for me to make my second case. A friend of mine called Stuart Granger runs a website called Attack of Smoke Cannabis, which again I recommend all of you Google. What he's been doing for several years now is correlating the reports in local newspapers, doesn't get into most national newspapers, of serious violent crimes in which there is a clear involvement of marijuana in the crime, whether that's to be a marijuana user. And what he finds is that huge numbers of these cases, now it's a really quite serious and often rather disturbing violent crime, which is totally irrational and frequently unexpected, are correlated. This doesn't again feature in any official statistics because nobody's gathering. People who have the money for research and research on this are not interested, but he has done so. And indeed, he's communicated for this research to Carol Black's current inquiry. What I find whenever I look into instances of terrorist violence is almost always from the murder of Lee Rigby's. I think almost every single one of the killings in France, Bataclan and the Charlie Hebdo, as the culprits, if you go to their background, they are serial users of marijuana. And what you have here is a problem which is in the poorer areas, it's going to be well known people, but those who are long-term users are often in mental states which make them extremely dangerous. And I personally suspect that if anybody did do the work, they would find that the current way of the knife crime, which has no other explanation that I can see, is driven by the same thing. So I wouldn't make light of it. I mean, also people are terribly complacent. A woman wrote to me a couple of years ago from Merseyside. I won't go into any more details because authenticity was where she wrote from. She was married to a carpenter who had, for many, many years, smoked marijuana and said, it doesn't do me any harm, I'm only using the old stuff, I'm not having anything to do with that scum, nothing wrong with me. And one morning he became so violent it took 9 police officers to drag him from the house to the mental hospital where he has been ever since. It is a dangerous drug. And anybody who minimizes its dangers to themselves or to anybody else is engaging in an act of grave responsibility for which I think they should be held responsible. So I would ask you not to be so brought down to someone myself.
Thank you, Tom. I was just wondering if you thought that perhaps with legalisation you might be able to perhaps educate people who are going to do it anyway, because as you illustrated earlier on, prohibition doesn't really solve anything. So things are readily available, legally safe, we can perhaps have safe usage of things as opposed to black market, unsafe. That makes any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like watching people with drill holes in their head in a safe way. There is actually a problem in drug legalization. It does have drill holes in their head. But whether things connected to your master judge, no, this is all the most problem. The problem with prohibition, so-called, is that there isn't any. Not in this country, not since about 1967, to my recollection. But there is what the complainants about prohibition call prohibition in two major developed free law-governed countries. And those two countries are Japan and South Korea. This is a travel advisory as well as a political point. If you go there, you will find that the attitude towards marijuana is nothing like as relaxed as it is here, and you will end up getting into serious trouble if you're in possession of it. And do you know what? It's tremendously educational. Many fewer people use it there than use it here. The best form of education about criminal acts, one of the best ways of preventing people from doing a stupid thing, is not to have a teacher sitting in school giving them a class with a thing on the board saying, these are perhaps the safer ones. So you get caught with this stuff the first time, you'll get a genuine caution. And you get caught with it a second time, you'll get a prison. Do you know what? If you did that, most people wouldn't think it was worth it. In 1967, again, long before any of you even thought of it, I was an invention came online. It was called the breathalyzer. And for the first time, it was possible for the police to prove that someone has alcohol in their blood above a certain limit. And before then, I remember people braying in pubs, oh, I can have 5 pints, so it was to me, the very idea, it's an assault on my freedom, people would say how much I can drink. And then they introduced breathalyzer. And probably about a couple hundred people were caught driving with their blood levels over the limit, and they were prosecuted. And do you know what? Drunken driving pretty much disappeared in a matter of months. Thanks to serious enforcement. You enforce the law seriously, people will pay. You don't enforce it seriously, people will ignore it. The best form of education to prevent people from doing stupid things is to say, if you do this, don't try to know all young people who know more. Don't try and say to them, all the things will happen to you that they will. Say to them, if you do that, you'll end up in jail. And what's more, you'll never be able to travel to the United States for the rest of your life, and your career will be ruined. No, they won't do it. It's very educational and very effective. It works in Japan and South Korea, and it will work here if we do this. And sooner or later, when I throw my groceries to that person.
Yes.
Is this not just freedom of choice? Also, to agree with the point of saying that in terms of violent crimes, I would say that's down to the austerity politics, austerity economic benefits for many years. Dealing between 20 players as well. I would put.
Could you elaborate?
In terms of our political context, yeah, I would say in terms of if economic growth is slowing down and productivity is down, and also you have rising unemployment and wages pushed down, then clearly and also things that will all enable them to get the things they want, rather than doing it in the normal work week, they've got a job, they've got enough time to do it. So I would say the private finance is completely different. I would say it's just to do with the austerity.
So you say private crime?
I would say so, yes, not all, yeah.
So how do you explain the extraordinary low levels of private crime that you put in this country during the Great Depression and the mass unemployment of the 1930s? Just didn't exist.
I wouldn't know.
No, you wouldn't. It's not. You did use the word freedom of choice, and it gives me again an opportunity to deal with the problem here. There are important freedoms that we have. The freedom of speech, which I'm exercising, the freedom of thought, which I'm exercising, the freedom of assembly, which we're all exercising. These are important. The freedoms which are protected, limited government, habeas corpus, presumption of innocence, jury trial, the Bill of Rights, Magna Carta, these things which are incredibly valuable and which so few of us pay any attention to, be allowed to be gradually salami sliced away by governments of both countries. These are freedoms. But the freedom to stupefy yourself, to a state of dozy, complacent, apathy, flaccid, it's not a freedom. That's the sort of freedom that any despot would delight in. They love to see people who are stoked into apathy and who never protest against it. Why would that be a freedom? It's not even remotely comparable. Those people who do, and I get this quite a lot, those people who do equate the freedom to stupefy yourself with the real freedoms are making a double mistake. First of all, they are in some ways spitting on the real freedoms. And secondly, they're misunderstanding. If I were a despot, then I would long to have a population that was out of its mind, because then that would mean I was guaranteed to be free of any sort of prohibition or being else. Why would you want that? It's not about corruption at all. And those who say that are either making a great mistake or deliberately misleading you in what way that is.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you, Peter. I pretty much agree with everything you said, and I can't really think, so I have a friend whose life is completely upside down through drug use. I just wonder if you also agree with me that cannabis legalisation not just pose a danger to the smoker, but also pose great risk to the wider society as a whole. So we know that cannabis is a depressant and thus slows down the action time. I wonder if you agree with me about concern that with these cannabis smokers behind the wheel, we'll see sort of a spike in cannabis driving incidents where obviously fatalities will occur.
Well, this is already happening. There's a recent case in Surrey where somebody who turned out to be the son of two police officers had been smoking cannabis and was in control of the car when two people were killed. He maintains that the two things are not connected, but it is undoubtedly the case that when bad accidents do occur, the police are increasingly finding that drugs of various kinds, marijuana is definitely one of them, are in the bloodstreams of people they catch. Things that, unlike the police in 1967, the police of today are reactive rather than attempting to prevent crime by the presence. And so the old police patrol used to be present to take people who gone. So we find out about these things after the accidents happen, not before. But it's a great danger. In many ways, the legalisation of marijuana is a straightforward ticket into the third world for any country which does. Because apart from anything else you imagine, you would have to have every single important trade or profession, from school bus drivers to surgeons to airline pilots, subjected to the most rigorous drug testing. This would be a real interference. It wouldn't matter whether you took drugs or not. You wouldn't be able to do your job until you did drug testing, morning, noon, and night. And if that wasn't done, then you can imagine the number of plane crashes, and train crashes, and bus crashes, and all the rest of it which would happen. Leaving aside the general effect of having such a drug in widespread use all day, advertised, promoted, sold in supermarkets, sold freely on the internet, the effect that would have on a supposed life society, everything from punctuality to efficiency, would obviously decline. So yes, it wouldn't just be bad for those people who were smoking, it would be bad for absolutely everybody. You could be run over by one, you could be knifed by one, or you could have your operation botched by one of them. But, or whatever it was, or your children could be taught by one of them. If you like the results of that either, but you would find the quality of life decline very sharply. It's a dangerous situation. That's one of the reasons Japan and South Korea, which are among the most successful countries, economically and politically in the world, don't have anything to do with it. Thank you very much. Why they hold out against what they quite correctly consider folly life. Gives them a big effect, right? They don't need people here, so it's just a problem.
Thank you. Yeah. It kind of follows on from the last point. I know a few people who have got their same friends. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on how far society would go towards legalising other substances if it was
Well, so far in this country, although most of the propaganda effort has been devoted to the legalisation of marijuana, what's generally happened, and I explored it to some length in the book, is that once the police stop taking marijuana seriously, they stop taking other drugs seriously as well. There's a surprisingly small number of prosecutions. Because we're always told if the police don't have to bother with that soft drug marijuana anymore, they'll be freed up for the more serious drugs. But if you look at the statistics for arrests and prosecutions for Class A drugs, heroin, cocaine, you'll find that they bump along at a pretty low level and never get any greater. And that most of those who are arrested and prosecuted do not go to prison. Penalties are in those cases quite minor. There was the case of the alleged singer Peter Hitches a few years ago, who was actually caught in a criminal courthouse in possession. He'd just been in court for having been in possession. He was caught again in the courthouse by a security man. Police are present for him. Caught by a security man with his coat pockets full of heroin. What do you think happened to him? I'll tell you what happened to him. Absolutely nothing happened to him, because that's what tends to happen to people who have in possession of heroin. So this whole argument, which is advanced, ceaselessly. For instance, that we have to legalise drugs so all these poor people who take heroin can be treated who would otherwise be flung in jail and treated harshly. This is complete hogwash. Again, they're not flung in jail and treated harshly. The policy of the government has for many, many, many years been to indulge. And in fact, the state demands the taxpayer on behalf of heroin users to provide them with vast expense with methadone and heroin substitute, which many of them probably sell on the streets so they can buy heroin, which they prefer methadone. And it's been a complete disaster. The arguments which I'm amazed one's gone in Portugal, the alleged great drug paradise, where the mayor of Porto, the second city of Portugal, recently came out and said this policy of drug legalisation is totally wrong, it should be reversed. In Portugal, since the decriminalisation, the amount of cannabis use has gone up by 40%. And that's despite the fact that the Portuguese law, which supposedly said why not be solved, is actually tougher in practice than British law. In Portugal, you can have your passport taken away with drugs. You can be told that you can't pursue your profession, whether you're a doctor or a taxi driver, you're banned from doing it. And you can be fined very heavily. So the idea that it's some kind of place where everybody's left to do what they want is untrue. And the idea where it's been a tremendous success also, of course, you just need to look at the facts, all of which are again found on the Peter Hitches blog in a lengthy and again brilliantly witty article about drug paradise. I recommend that everybody who's taken in by this propaganda garbage. Yes.
Yes.
Something I think you could perhaps add a little clarity on, and if you have to, is the idea that we should partially decriminalise marijuana for more research to try and convince that its potential medical benefits, or indeed its problematic side for people who are addicted to it. Is part of the decriminalisation for the purposes of research that we would support?
Well, actually, the Home Office has been extremely liberal for many years about research on marijuana. I can't tell you where it is, but there is a very large cannabis farm in one of the southern English counties at the moment, which is run entirely for that purpose. There have been many efforts to try and establish whether marijuana has any medicinal problems, which will not be particularly. I mean, there's been for many years a drug license to hospital prescription called Navalone, which is actually based on THC, the actual dangerous of the two main ingredients of marijuana. There are other attempts now, particularly by GW Pharma, which is also producing THC-based medicine, which hasn't been totally successful in this to make medicine out of CBD, cannabidiol, the other second ingredient, which they say is actually quite effective in controlling various forms of epileptic seizure. And it may be true, I don't know, but there's been absolutely no restriction by the Home Office to prevent sensible, civilized research to try and discover whether it can be used as a medicine. What I will tell you is this, that no dose could possibly be dispensed or taken in the form in which marijuana is taken by those who buy it on the street. You know, that's in smoke. Every medicine has to be very, very carefully measured with dose. Every medicine has to be tested against placebos. Particularly difficult to test any THC-based medicine against placebos because people will know, won't they, that they've got the one that makes them high rather than one that doesn't. So a double-blind test is sort of essential in all drug testing as possible. And then again, there's the other thing. Unless you probably are too young to know much about this, it was a very constant experience when I was at university. You would have heard of the drug thalidomide and the terrible effects which it had on children in the womb. They were born without limbs, without fully developed limbs. And again, when I was your age, there were quite a large number of people visible in society who suffered this. And thalidomide, the thing about thalidomide was it was an extraordinarily successful drug at treating morning sickness in pregnant women, which is disturbing. And when it was initially marketed, people thought, well, this is wonderful, because it was hell to go through, and that even something which was passed by control. And then they discovered side effects are very important. You may have a miracle drug, but if its side effects are of that order, then it can't conceivably be licensed by any wise, properly governed country. But here you have a drug which is associated, and has been associated since the sleep very closely with permanent mental illness. We, again, look at the work of Professor Robin Murray, one of his most distinguished psychiatrists, who constantly sees the effects of marijuana in his South London practice. And you cannot conceivably, it seems to me, talk about the licensing of the drug, something which has a side effect, which is so devastating, you couldn't possibly do it. But to pretend, as the legalizers so often do, that somehow or other the criminal law against marijuana prevents any research into its medical properties, it's a straightforward, big, fat lie. It simply is not true.
So noting the problems you've already had with cannabis as a recreational drug, how would you recommend British law reforms to help the problems that you've mentioned?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch them.
How would you recommend British law reforms itself to resolve all the problems that you've noted with cannabis in England?
The law of this country as it stands on marijuana is quite straightforward. It's separated wrongly, in my view, in the classification of drugs of A, B, and C. It was one of the great triumphs of the marijuana decriminalisation campaign that wanted to give different status to the bogey. But even given that it's now classified as Class B, the penalties for possession, people are dealing with the maximum penalty for possession of marijuana is 5 years imprisonment and an unlimited fine. And I don't believe that anything remotely resembling this penalty has been applied to anyone caught in possession of marijuana since at least 1973. And what I would recommend, as I've said briefly earlier on, is that as with all crime, people make stupid mistakes. None of us have not. But if people are caught in possession of marijuana for the first time, they should be given a genuine caution. And it should be recorded, and they should be told at the time they give this caution. If we catch you with this again, then there will be serious criminal consequences. And I believe that if this law were applied by the police and the courts, probably for a period of only 6 months, the number of people taking the very foolish risk of using this drug would rapidly. There's no need to change it. It simply needs, what it needs is to actually apply the law. Now here's the thing, you'll find quite a lot of the marijuana legalizers will claim that there is no connection between the severity of laws against the drug and its use. And of course, if all you do is look at the paper laws, that's perfectly true. But as soon as you put into this mix those two countries which actually enforce those, you find it completely different where the law is enforced. The use of the drug is greatly reduced. There's no solution to these problems. not only utopian or an idealist, but we can ameliorate it. I think an awful lot of young people who come at it immense peer pressure to take the same drug, because in many cases they think it will ruin their life. Would be able to resist that pressure much more strongly if we had a properly enforced law and they could stay with their record. I don't want to go to prison. I don't want to be banned from going to the United States the rest of my life. I want to work in a proper profession. I don't want to be part of it. So no, thanks, not for me. But at the moment, nobody has any way of resisting that peer pressure. Whether it's school or university, wherever they are, where the pressure comes, and you're to say, oh, go on, join in. And that's what I would do. I would enforce the law that we have. Nothing else needs to be done. But certainly we would get rid of it.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could back the portion up, because I read that when they realised that the amount of HIV cases, I think we could do decrease a lot.
I'm not sure whether you could really make that claim. My understanding, I have to look up Neil McKagan's excellent work on this subject, is that actually there isn't really such a connection. There was a huge amount of supply of clean needles licensed a few years ago, and by and large it had no effect at all. I'd be interested to know what the source of your claim was. While you work that out, I'll look up what McKagan said about this design. I don't have it at my fingertips, but it's an important detail.
Can you just repeat that thing again?
So I can't remember exactly where I read that, all of the claims that I had to HIV cases by people use drugs.
Yeah, I'm sorry. McKagan is mainly with Scottish experience, if that's the way he works. There was a thing called the Unlinked Anonymous Surveillance Program. And that recorded a drop in dangerous needle sharing between 1991 and 2006, during which millions of needles had been distributed at public expense. Do you know what the drop was? 1%. That was 24% of injectors to 23%, despite the fact that they were being given free needles. But what he also says, this is some years ago, I think they've changed now, the methadone program in Scotland was costing £40 million a year. The United Kingdom was 300 million, but he estimated it resulted in fewer than 5% of drug abuse becoming drug free. But these programs are not working. What has happened since the late 1960s is the attitude of the authorities and the medical profession towards drug abusers to treat them as if they were ill. And during this time, the number of drug abusers, particularly of heroin, and now, of course, crack cocaine, has gone up exponentially to figures which would be unimaginable in the 60s. And I say two things. First of all, how the law against possession of those drugs be enforced, I don't believe the numbers would have reached prison or anything like that. Secondly, I don't believe that you can treat drug abusers as if they were ill people. It's the decision to take a drug such as heroin is an actual decision. You don't just walk in with people, nor do you just become habituated to the drug just like that. You have to work quite hard at it. And lots of people who have cancer would love to be able to do that, but they can't. And so to compare people who have deliberately, by no criminal act, have made themselves habitual users of the dangerous drug, which they do without it, to make them the equivalent, as a lavish on public money given actually for treating genuinely sick people, it seems to me to be virtually obscene. I think it's also a mistake the only effective has been over what is now half a century of application. The only effective is year by year by year, more and more people take these drugs and have their lives damaged. If we had a forced law in these cases, we wouldn't get so I don't have any doubt about it.
Thank you.
So I just want to point out that correlation doesn't equal causation. And you said that you don't really have anything to say that, you know, it's the cannabis is causing mental health issues or mental health issues, or people with mental health issues that then come to use
I
cannabis.
can't hear a lot of what you're saying.
So
You do it slow.
I'm saying that you said that you don't actually have any evidence to say that cannabis users have mental health issues because of the cannabis use and not because they turned to cannabis because they had mental health issues previously. And another thing you said was that all the research is from people who want to legalise cannabis, but most of the people that are on the side of yourself are, like yourself, rich white men.
Right, well, first add-on computing. If there's any more good, I'll give it as good as I can. But no, here's the good old correlation is not causation argument. Well, yeah, correlation is not necessarily causation, but it's also not necessarily not causation. In fact, it's the foundation of epidemiology. If you look up the case of John Snow and the padlock pump in Soho, the original case of correlation was established. There are certain water pump as the origin of the cholera by correlation, although it's important. Correlation can, of course, be completely meaningless. But for instance, if I said to you, do you know what? If you carry on inhaling hot, burning fumes from a tube of vegetable matter over and over and over again, it might do some of your lungs. And if later on there's a correlation between smoking and lung cancer, you might think that that correlation was meaningless. Similarly, if lots of people take a drug which actually has the effects of being psychotropic or altering their mental state, and they later on develop mental problems, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that there might possibly be some connection? Some correlations and some correlations there. I am not actually, by the standards of, for instance, the billionaires who financed Proposition 64 in California, particularly rich. I don't sound better off than I was when I was here. I'm reasonably well paid, but I live in a crumbling semi-detached house 65 miles from London, and look at this suit. I don't claim to be rich. It would be foolish to imagine that I could finance, I wish I could, the enormously expensive research which I would like to see done on this matter. But how does one set about it research this kind of thing? And it also involves persuading academic institutions to undertake unfashionable research which may damage their careers. So I don't think that's really particularly good point. But if you've got any other comments you want to go through the test now,
Thank you.
So I think we can agree both for legalization and non-legalization that seeing people's lives are ruined by drug abuse or alcohol abuse is a terrible thing. But I really enjoy being put about and having fun with my mates. I really enjoy going to music festivals. I think it's people's capacity you have on your work to enjoy music that, frankly, denying the influence of the drugs on the music would be ludicrous. From drug use, there have been a lot of disasters. There have also been a lot of...
You're speaking so close to the microphone, and we are so near to each other. I can't actually hear us. All the microphone back.
So we've spoken a lot about the detrimental effects of drugs. which are undeniable. Would you also at least be able to acknowledge some of the positive effects that drugs may have, such as having in a social situation in a pub, which Britain, if it wasn't for pubs that socialised, would be pretty awful. And also, with things like music, I think it's a big discovery that you have in the book.
It's a satirical version. So, it's not quite as good as one of the rings.
Let's see it for example.
No, good.
You might agree that some of the, I don't know if it'll be time at all, but some music has definitely been heavily influenced by drugs and will privilege for that. And
What is your point?
That there are positive sides to drugs, as well as detrimental effects of drugs, and denying this as music is denying the risks.
I don't know. Let's start. There seems quite a high proportion. Again, I'm the 60s. I was in the 60s, and I remember it's quite a high proportion of rock musicians and singers who ended their lives by, as the phrase goes, choking on their own point. That's the US point that was choked on, but that's what they did. It's the casualty level among people of that generation is very high, as generally as a result of drug use. So, if you like the music that they produce, and you were told they would only produce that music if they'd taken those drugs, would you be prepared to sacrifice their lives for your pleasure? Would you say, okay, well, I don't care if they take their own lives. Well, often be very awful. That's okay because of the greatness of the music. I'm just interested to know, would you think that was an okay bargain?
I'm not promoting the drug use.
What you're saying, what you seem to be saying, it's an essential part of what they do.
I'm not saying it's I'm saying no, it definitely had a non-neutral factor in music.
What do you mean by non-neutral?
An influence on music production. I'm saying it was
Positive?
positive drugs.
Did you think it was positive? So what you are saying is that's okay.
I'm not saying that's okay.
It's a price. It's a price to pay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure you do, but I do.
Yes, Matt.
Hello, I'm actually reflecting based on comments on something that I'm touching here, which is the intellectual damage done by marijuana, and how that has an impact on the way it's perceived by people around here. I'm a prison tutor. I've just come from my shop. I have 12 students today, all of whom have marijuana tags on their records. They have all taken it. About half of whom have taken other drugs, and there's no such thing as an alcohol tag in our system. All of them have IQs less than the average, less than 100. A significant proportion, probably 8 out of the 12, have IQs less than 90. A significant proportion of those have IQs less than 85. Everybody in this room, if you're going to this university, is almost guaranteed to have an IQ of 115 plus. Because of where you are and what you are doing intellectually. Marijuana has an effect on IQ. It reduces the IQ of everybody who uses it. And there is no doubt that's the case. However, if you're going to a place like this with an IQ of 115, you can lose a point. You can lose 2 points, you can lose 3 points. What difference would it really make? If you've got an IQ of the high 80s, and you end up with an IQ of the low 80s, you're in trouble. You'll have me teaching you how to add 2 figure numbers together in a prison. Now, can I ask you, please, that's been issued, could you please reflect on the idea that the people who are making the decisions about the legalisation, the people making the noise about it, the people who think it's okay are the people like those in this room who have no direct experience of the negative effects of marijuana use.
Well, I can endorse that. And it seems almost idle to add anything to it. It seems to stand as a point which I would be very glad to make myself, I think. There is and this is one of the problems which we have in our increasingly class-divided society. Class-divided for reasons I went into in the last occasion I spoke here, because of the extraordinarily foolish decision in the 1960s to abolish academic selection in state schools, which deprived so many people from poor and good education, which that it is very, very common among well-off people in pleasant places such as this to be wholly unaware of the effects of the policies which they seek for their own benefit on poor people, what it actually means in really, really bad parts of this country for there's been no control over drugs, to live as people with right to me live surrounded by unrestrained drug users. And you do have to be aware, I'm told that I'm rich, but you're privileged. You're all privileged or you wouldn't be here. And you should, when you take positions on that, just be aware of that position, be aware that something which might be possible for you to cope with would be disastrous for somebody in a poorer country, in a poorer place, much more restricted job prospects, and degraded, ending up being taught about numbers by you. I'm sure it's but it's not anything that you really want to put up with. So you have to be aware of that. And as I said, what you say is completely backed up by the Ghanaian study, which any tracked people through many, many years of life. There's no question. Downward effect in terms of the use of marijuana. Did that vary? Perhaps that's why so many people are in favor of it.
Any for time for 3 or 4 more questions? Yes. Sorry, 4 5.
Yeah, thank you for coming. You've made some excellent points so far.
So far.
So far. Well, I would like to challenge you on. I'd like to challenge you on this. Earlier, when the gentleman over there made the point about legalising marijuana for medicinal use, you opposed it. You opposed it primarily based off there's insufficient levels of evidence surrounding how to prescribe it properly. But what I would say is, if you compare it to the opioid epidemic in the United States, for example, I think when you look at that there, the doctors are far more liberal in its prescription, and there is problems with that because there are side effects with opioids, like there is side effects with cannabis. But nobody in the US is calling for opioids to be banned. They're just saying that doctors are far more liberal with their prescriptions based on the economic incentives of the healthcare system. So, as such, would you reconsider your argument for the legalisation of marijuana for medicinal use? Because, I mean, look at how the Home Office earlier in 2018 had to legalise cannabis, cannabinoid oil being imported into the UK for the issue of the boy with epilepsy. And there's a lot of cases with which cannabinoid oil is a necessary drug for treatment of mental health issues. So there are positive externalities in issues when it comes to people with mental health issues. And of course now, in November 2018, the NHS, the Home Office had to legalise its use, in Parliament legalised its use for prescription on the NHS for mental health issues. So as such, there are genuine cases in which cannabinoid oil and marijuana-based products are necessary for the treatment of mental health issues, and as the having described it tonight as some sort of.
What's the question? Sorry.
What my point is, it's a far more nuanced case surrounding the legalisation of marijuana for medicinal use and how you described it tonight. Would you concede that there are genuine cases in which marijuana-based products, such as cannabinoid oil, are necessary for the treatment of mental health issues, such as those currently with it being described for in the NHS?
It's complicated. I'll try not to take as long as you did. When these very rending cases of these mothers with young, very sick children were presented to us, nobody, even I, who have a well-known heart of stone, could be unmoved. But on the other hand, I continued to question, and I wanted to know exactly what it was in front of these cases that they were seeking to have imported and licensed. So I did what a proper journalist should do. I made telephone calls and sent emails to people involved, and I asked them for assistance in just exactly what it was that they were so keen to have imported. And they refused to tell me. Which doesn't seem to me to be the attitude of somebody whose main interest is in promoting broad daylight and advanced medicine. Once more, many of the people who were involved in this, I'm leaving completely out of it the mother and child involved, many people who were involved in this campaign, who I found myself speaking to, were also involved in open campaigns for recreational legalization of cannabis. So I thought, well, maybe it's possible that they saw this as an opportunity to make a Trojan horse out of this, and to get the public used to the idea of cannabis as a medicine, and that would take away from it some of the stigma which in my view is rightly not associated with that. And it's very sophisticated propaganda. The argument about whether CBD is an effective treatment in quite large doses for some sort of epileptic seizures is made, and has been made to me by the UW Fund, which produces a medicine based on this diet, and they could produce some research on this which is quite persuasive. But most of what is said by others who have been made in this case is much less precise, much less based on research. I have many criticisms, by the way, and if you want to look this up, you can, particularly on prescribing of antidepressants to adults and prescribing of what are effectively amphetamines to small children alleged to have ADHD. I have many criticisms of the practice of medicine or prescribing. It's by no means perfect, so it's just a defense of big pharma or something. I'm not their friend either. But what I will say is that it seems to me to be absolutely essential before licensing anything as a medicine that it is properly researched, both for its side effects and disadvantages, and also in proper double-blind placebo tests to see if it does what it's claimed to do. Anybody can claim that something is going to or has had an ameliorating effect on some disease or other. But that's not research. And it doesn't make it any more research if the case is very moving, as the cases of those two boys were moving. It doesn't make it any more scientific just because it's moving. And I'll tell you something else. A man called Keith Screw, who is probably the longest living campaigner for marijuana legalization in the world, is the originator and chief person of the American campaign for marijuana legalization in Normal. And he went to the Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1973, and thinking himself among friends, he gave an interview to the university newspaper called the Emory Wheel, in which he said, we will use medical marijuana as a red herring to get Bob a good name. And I think it has been one of the most successful red herrings in history, and very effective. You fought for it, obviously, and quite a lot of people have too. But he said it. For a while, he tried to deny that he said it. And now he doesn't, because I went to the Emory University Library on the original ad and will provide it to anybody who wants to see it. He said it. And it's my view that he meant it. It's been a very skillfully run campaign, and many people extremely effective, but you shouldn't fall for it, especially now you know that. It is a red-herring largely. If anybody ever proves that any constituent part of marijuana, whether tetrahydrocannabinol or cannabidiol, is effective as a medicine and is safe for use in measured doses, then I will be the first to say use it. But as long as this red herring is used to try and give a very, very nasty, dangerous, damaging recreational drug, with some good public relations spin, I will be against it. And so should anybody with their wits about it. These are the hidden persuasions. Advertising and PR. You know what Edward Bernays did when he invented the term public relations, and why he invented it. He said, let's call it public relations, it sounds much nicer than propaganda. It is. It sounds much nicer. But it is. The thing about propaganda is people fall for it. And people here, if this is a university rather than just a nightclub that gives degrees, propaganda, you should not fall for it.
Yeah, I agree with your point against the legalization. But I'm just wondering, can you see any further benefits coming from, say, waiving a law and possibly get it become legal? Do you see any benefits from it becoming legal in the future? Like yourself, it's probably a quick answer there, but.
No.
Yes.
Just leading on from the question about, using cannabis for medicinal benefits, do you think it's right that cannabis is legal is available for free on Welsh NHS for treatment against seizures and multiple sclerosis, but not in the rest of the UK, England, Scotland, and Ireland?
I'm a believer in the legal law. If the Welsh Assembly government wants to license certain things as medicines, then it's fair. And I have no role in what they do. I disapprove of the use by cannabis legalizers of the argument for medical marijuana, because I think it is, as I say, propaganda. But I'm not going to get involved in hearing what I think is right or wrong. But plainly, I think that it's unwise. But and plainly, I believe, like you were saying, if you provide research, proper research, rigorous research, which shows that these things are safe and effective, then there's no argument against it. On this occasion, I don't think that you can. But if the Welsh Assembly government wants to do that, it's fair. And it's one of those reasons why, despite the speculation, I don't want to live in Wales.
I'd like to know if we going back to what I said, if you're not free to have a bar, it's already consciousness, or doing that half and you can dismiss this if we're going to shoot by itself. I don't think disagree with that.
But you yourself quoted Mr. Hancock as using the words while doing, I've got it here in shorthand, while doing it no harm to others. And I thought I'd explain elaborate, painful, and even tedious that the cannabis user does do harm. You want to do it again? Cannabis abuser by harming himself. It's an illegal drug. Yeah, sure. Well, I thought you were.
The question is why a shooting activity, whether it's skydiving, horse riding, which is a comparison data, or smoking cannabis, the unlawful individual to pursue just because.
Well, here's the thing. If you undertake activities such as skydiving, or riding horses, or rock climbing, or mountain climbing, what you will find is that before you're allowed to risk your life, you tend to be compelled by the other people in that field of endeavor to learn to do the thing well. And that you try as hard as you possibly can to reduce it. So that by the time you're actually released onto the rock face, or you're riding the horse that you speak, or you're doing the skydiving, you know thousands of checks made. The other thing is that as the more you do it, the better you get. And further, it seems to me, from my experience, that people have done, that people that do these things, which involve courage and skill and services, become better people as a result. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, maybe.
Right, I definitely agree. So, I don't think any of those things can be said of those. I don't think it's a serious comparison which anybody of any intellect should make, or anybody of any responsibility should make. I think it's a responsible folly to suggest that was more or less what I think Professor Nutt.
Just round the event off, shall we see?
I'm hoping to meet tomorrow.
Okay. Show of hands for those who would legalise marijuana. Those in favour of legalising marijuana. Yes. And then against? So that's a change. Thank you very much for coming tonight. You'll carry all the so say a couple of hours again, that's appreciated. And thank you very much.